This is David Belem with BelemFiles.com. We provide expert analysis about national security and terrorism. For obvious reasons, I modified my voice. In episode 3, I explain why Al-Qaida attacked the Twin Towers and the Pentagon when they were relatively empty on September 11, 2001. If you did not watch episode 1 yet, please do it afterwards. This is because in episode 1, I provide the basics for the analysis of terrorist attacks. As I said before, to untrained eyes, terrorist attacks seem random, impulsive, senseless, and without purpose or objectives. In fact, global jihadists meticulously plan their attacks. They carefully evaluate the targets, timing, and mode of attacks. Each attack has its own unique characteristics. Analyzed together, they provide us with a forensic profile. I was asked many questions on that fateful morning of September 11, but very few had the wisdom to ask about the timing of the attacks. This is a question that should have been asked. Why did Al-Qaida strike so early in the morning when the towers and the Pentagon were relatively empty before the customary 9 a.m. beginning of a workday? If they delayed their attacks by just 2 hours, they could have killed about 10 times more Americans. So, here is the quantification. Al-Qaida wanted to kill as many Americans as possible, even in the millions. But, at the same time, for a very specific reason, the jihadists limited the number of victims. This great contradiction does not make any sense. Those who attempted to explain the inconsistency concluded that whoever planned this massive assault was not familiar with the American work schedule and, therefore, missed a great opportunity to kill so many more Americans. This assessment was founded on complete ignorance of the strategies global jihad follows as it fights Western civilization. The timing was not a mistake on part of the jihadists. It was chosen deliberately. In fact, the purpose of these self-imposed restraints is not a product of sympathy jihadists grant their victims. This is because they view compassion and leniency as a weakness they cannot afford. I will take you now into the thought process that led to Al-Qaeda's decision to intentionally attack the Twin Towers and the Pentagon when they were relatively empty. One of the most important strategies global jihad employs is designed to prevent its victims from using full force to retaliate against jihadist attacks. To reach this objective, the planners of jihadist attacks have developed a cunning equation. Inflict on the enemy just enough pain needed to harvest the political, social, economic, and military gains they desire, while, at the same time, they keep the victims subdued and prevent a reaction that may destroy them. They do this by following a two-part strategy. The first is to lower the intensity of attacks in order to limit the number of casualties and extent of damage. The second part is to use time as a dimension to space the attacks apart. I branded this strategy the cooking of lobsters. So here is a short culinary lesson. When a lobster is dropped into a pot full of water, it feels comfortable and does not try to escape. The cook then raises the temperature infrequently and in small increments. With every slight increase, the lobster feels a bit uncomfortable, but not enough to make the effort needed to flee. Only after the lobster gets used to the increased heat, the cook raises the temperature again. This step is repeated multiple times. By the time the temperature is too high and the lobster decides to flee the pot, it is already doomed. This is because the lobster at that stage is partially cooked and too weak to implement an exit strategy. Yasser Arafat, the murderous head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, and one of the founding fathers of modern international terrorism, was a master at the cooking of the lobster strategy. During decades of international terrorism against Western civilization, he adversely shaped global political and socioeconomic conditions using thousands of carefully controlled and spaced out attacks. This cunning strategy allowed the PLO to continue its vicious terrorism campaign for about 5 decades, while its victims adopted restrained, ineffective, and mostly defensive policies. Al-Qaida anticipated a restrained response to the September 11 attacks for 2 reasons. The only one I can reveal relates to global jihad's pre-2001 perception of the United States and Americans as cowards who are weak and hesitant. This perception was shaped during the last decades of the 20th century as the United States responded to jihadist terrorism with a mix of capitulation and absence of retaliation. I will cite now 2 examples. In 1982, a newly formed Iranian proxy terrorist organization named Hezbollah attacked the American embassy and Marines barracks in Beirut, Lebanon. Instead of fighting back, American military ran away and abandoned the Lebanese population to be victimized by Iran's brutal and insatiable appetite for jihadist worldwide domination. In 1993, once again, American forces ran away. This time it was from lightly armed and loosely organized Somali warlords. Inside its heartland, very few and deliberately sporadic jihadist attacks caused Americans to restrict their freedom-loving lifestyle in favor of ever-expanding defensive parameters. On the rare occasions the United States deployed its military, policymakers limited the operations to infrequent, restricted, and restrained bombings. Al-Qaeda planners feared that killing 30,000 to 40,000 Americans would trigger a devastating response that could destroy them completely. At the same time, they were confident that limiting the number of casualties would hurt less and likely result in the expected limited response in the form of some scattered bombing of Al-Qaeda's assets. Based on this presumption, they purposely restrained their attacks and limited their targets to relatively empty buildings. I believe that if they knew that the United States would retaliate by invading Afghanistan and Iraq, they would have delayed their plans for as long as decades to come and not dare bring their fight against Western civilization into American soil. There are many lessons to be learned from the planning and execution of the September 11 attacks. One of them is recognizing the awesome power of deterrence. Thousands of Americans are alive today because even though Al-Qaida wanted and could have killed them, it was too afraid to do it. The extension of this lesson is one of the most important recommendations I make for a successful foundation of a counter-terrorism campaign. We must control American perception in the eyes of our allies and enemies. Now is the time to reiterate Belem's law number 9. It is not what we do that counts, but rather how our actions are perceived by the world, Islam, and most importantly, our enemy, global jihad, its followers, and those who contemplate whether to fight us or not. So now you know, and now you can no longer claim ignorance because I just told you. For about 1300 years, global jihad has been fighting Western civilization. Unfortunately, jihad is winning. This is because even after 12 centuries of conflict, Western leaders and the general public still fail to conceptualize jihadist ideology. One cannot win against an enemy one does not know. Our most effective weapon is knowledge. I expose the ideology, concepts, and tactics that make global jihad so deadly. To read more expert analysis about national security and terrorism, please visit our site, BelemFiles.com. Please share to social media and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.